The Antarctic wind howled like a living beast across the endless white wasteland where Research Station 7 stood like a small metal island in an ocean of ice and death that stretched to every horizon under a sun that never set properly during the summer months. Amy Martinez wrapped her thick thermal coat tighter around her body as she worked on the main heating unit that kept the 60 researchers and support staff alive in this place, where exposed skin could freeze in seconds and metal could shatter like glass. She was only 28 years old, but already the best mechanic the Antarctic Research Program had seen in years, which was why they sent her to the most remote station, where everything broke constantly, and repairs meant the difference between life and death. The work was hard, but Amy loved it because here she could focus on machines without dealing with the complications of normal life, like her ex-boyfriend who had cheated with her best friend, or her family asking when she would have children. Her radio crackled with static. Then Dr. Lisa Chen spoke through the white noise with a voice that shook with something between fear and excitement, saying, "Amy, drop whatever you are doing and get to dig Site 3 because we found something impossible." Amy knew Lisa was not someone who got excited easily because the scientist had spent 5 years in Antarctica studying ice cores and ancient climate data without ever raising her voice above a careful, measured tone. Until now, something in Lisa's voice made Amy work faster to finish the heating repair, because leaving it half done could mean frozen pipes and no heat for the dormitory wing. But she trusted her assistant Grace to monitor the system. The journey to dig Site 3 took 3 hours using a tracked vehicle that crawled over ice ridges and through winds that tried to push them off course, while Amy wondered what could have made Lisa sound so amazed and frightened. When she finally arrived and descended into the excavation shaft that went down 50 meters through solid ice, Amy understood why Lisa had called her, because there at the bottom was a cave that should not exist. The cavern was massive, stretching out beyond the reach of their lights with walls of ice that looked carved rather than natural, and in the center sat something that made Amy's brain struggle to process what her eyes were seeing. It was a ship, but not any ship that humans had ever built, because the design was all wrong, with flowing curves that reminded her of water frozen mid-motion, and a hull that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue. The vessel was enormous, at least 200 meters from what she could see, with parts still buried in ice. But what shocked her most was how perfect it looked with no rust or damage, despite being encased in ancient ice. Lisa stood beside her holding a tablet with shaking hands and said their initial scans showed the ice around the ship was at least 800 years old, which meant this thing had been here since before humans knew how to fly. Amy walked forward, drawn by professional curiosity and something else she could not name. As her boots crunched on the frozen floor and she reached out to touch the hull with her gloved hand, the metal felt strange even through the thick glove, and she could see her reflection in the surface, distorted and alien-looking, while symbols carved into what might be a door seemed to move when she was not looking directly at them. "This is not from Earth," Amy stated the obvious because someone had to say it out loud, and Lisa nodded while other team members gathered behind them, whispering among themselves about first contact and aliens. But Amy was already thinking like a mechanic as she examined visible components and connection points, seeing patterns that almost made sense if she tilted her head and forgot everything she knew about human engineering. "I can fix this," she announced, which made everyone stare at her like she had gone insane. But Amy just shrugged because fixing things was what she did, whether they were diesel generators or apparently alien spaceships. "Give me a full team and all the equipment we can spare," she told Lisa, who started to protest about protocols and safety. But Amy cut her off, saying this ship has been here for centuries, and it is not going anywhere. That was when they heard the crack, like thunder, underground, and everyone froze, because ice breaking could mean the cave was unstable, but the sound had not come from above but from near the front of the ship. Amy's flashlight beam swept across the ice and found something that made her heart stop for a moment, because there was another structure attached to the ship like a giant pod made of crystal or transparent metal. Through the ice she could see shapes inside that structure, and they were moving slightly, which should have been impossible after 8 centuries, but Amy had already accepted that impossible was just another word for interesting. One shape was definitely humanoid, but too tall and thin, with proportions that were wrong for a human, and she could make out what looked like pointed ears extending past where shoulders should. The other shape made even less sense because it had wings folded against a long body, with what might be a tail, and scales that caught their lights and threw back rainbow patterns even through the thick ice. "Get the thermal equipment down here." Immediately, Amy ordered, taking charge because she was the only one thinking clearly, while others stood frozen by shock. "And we need medical teams on standby." Someone asked if she really planned to thaw out whatever was in that pod, and Amy turned to face the frightened researcher, saying these beings have been frozen for 800 years and they deserve a chance. Besides, she added with a grin that held more confidence than she felt, if they survived this long, they must have some kind of preservation technology we can learn from, assuming they do not kill us all first. The team scattered to follow her orders while Amy stayed in the cave studying the ship and planning how to safely extract two beings from ice without destroying them or letting them die from shock. Hours passed as equipment arrived, and Amy directed the setup of heating elements and medical monitors while never taking her eyes off the crystal pod where their visitors waited in frozen sleep. She thought about all the repair jobs she had done in her life, from cars to generators to the life support systems that kept Antarctic stations running. But this would be the biggest challenge she had ever faced, as the first heating elements activated and ice began to slowly melt. Amy touched the crystal pod again and made a promise to whatever was inside that she would bring them back, because that was her gift. She fixed broken things and made them work again, and these beings with their impossible ship were just another puzzle to solve, even if they came from beyond the stars and might change everything. Humans believed. The Antarctic storm raged somewhere above but down in the cave. Amy Martinez had found the discovery that would transform human history, and she would be the one to wake it from its ancient sleep. The defrosting process moved slower than Amy wanted, but she knew that rushing could destroy whatever preservation technology kept the beings alive for 8 centuries, so she forced herself to be patient while monitoring every small change. 18 hours passed with Amy barely leaving the cave as she watched temperature readings and adjusted heating elements, while the rest of the team took shifts, but she refused to rest because this was too important to trust to anyone else. As the ice melted, the ship began responding to the warmth in ways that amazed everyone, because sections of the hull started glowing with soft blue and purple light that pulsed like a heartbeat, making the cave feel alive. Dr. Beth Kumar arrived with her medical team and scanning equipment that was designed for humans but would have to work on whatever was in that crystal pod because they had nothing else to use in Antarctica. The readings Beth got made no sense at first, showing life signs that were impossible, with metabolism so slow they were almost dead. Yet brain activity continued in patterns that looked more like computer code than human thoughts. Amy focused on the ship itself while the medical team monitored the pod, and she discovered that what she had thought was metal was actually something between organic and mechanical that responded to her touch like living tissue. The main door had no handle or visible opening mechanism, but when Amy placed both hands on it, she felt warmth spreading from her palms and the door surface began changing under her fingers. Grace arrived with Amy's tablet and tools, saying everyone at the station was talking about the discovery and some wanted to contact the government. But Kate Phillips, the station director, had locked down communications until they knew more. Amy agreed with that decision, because the last thing they needed was military teams rushing in and taking over when they were just starting to understand what they had found in the ice beneath Antarctica. She connected her tablet to what looked like a data port on the ship, and immediately symbols began flowing across her screen in patterns that hurt to look at directly, but slowly started making sense. "The ship is trying to talk to us," Amy said, as the symbols shifted and changed until some of them looked almost like mathematical equations mixed with something that might be language. Beth called out that the ice on the pod was almost gone, and they were getting clearer readings, showing 2 distinct life forms, with one definitely humanoid and the other something that matched no Earth creature. That was when the symbols on Amy's tablet suddenly froze, then rearranged themselves into broken English words that made everyone in the cave stop what they were doing and stare. Warning the screen showed, followed by pursuers, then war, and finally trust mechanic, which made Amy wonder how the ship knew she was a mechanic and why it seemed to be asking for her help before anyone could react. The crystal pod made a hissing sound like pressure releasing, and the top section began opening, while medical scanners went crazy with readings that Beth said made no biological sense. The air that escaped from the pod smelled like ozone, mixed with something floral but not from any earth flower, and it made everyone step back except Amy, who moved closer, drawn by curiosity. The humanoid figure was definitely female with skin that looked like polished silver metal, but moved like flesh, and her ears were indeed pointed, extending past her shoulders in elegant curves that seemed both beautiful and alien. She wore armor that looked grown rather than made with pieces that fit together like scales or leaves, and even unconscious, she radiated a sense of power that made the humans feel small. Beside her lay a creature that should only exist in fantasy, because it was clearly a dragon, though no larger than a house cat with perfect proportions, including wings folded against its body. The scales shifted color between purple and gold as the lights moved, and even sleeping the creature had smoke or steam wisping from its nostrils, which proved it was breathing, despite the impossible nature of its existence. The female suddenly gasped, and her eyes snapped open, revealing irises of deep violet with pupils that looked like tiny stars. And she tried to sit up while speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with breaking glass. Then she seemed to focus and switched to accented English, saying, "Human, you have awakened us from the long sleep. Tell me quickly, does the war still rage? And have the devourers found this world?" Amy stepped forward without thinking and steadied the woman who was trying to stand but seemed weak and disoriented from her long sleep in the ice that had preserved her for centuries. "I do not know what devourers are, but you are safe," Amy said firmly, because the woman needed reassurance. "And you are on Earth in Antarctica. And the year is 2157, so you have been asleep for a very long time." The woman gripped Amy's arms with surprising strength for someone who just woke up, and her star pupil eyes went wide with shock and something like hope as she processed this information. "Earth," she breathed like it was a prayer, then added the sanctuary world spoken of in the oldest songs. "Then we succeeded, and our flight was not in vain." But her expression darkened as she continued. "But if you have awakened us, then they will know," she said with growing urgency, "because the devourers always feel when their prey stirs, and they will come to finish what they started so long ago." The dragon creature stirred and stretched its wings, which somehow cast shadows much larger than its small body should create, and then Amy heard a voice in her mind like crystal bells forming words. "She speaks truth, mechanic human," the mental voice said, "and the ship sang to you, which means you are the chosen one who must repair us because the war comes to your world, whether you wish it or not." Amy looked around at her team, who were staring in shock at proof of alien life and possibly telepathic dragons, then back at the woman who was leaning on her for support. "Then I guess we better get to work," Amy said with her usual practical approach to problems, "and fix your ship before these devourers arrive, because that is what I do. Best solving impossible problems." The woman stared at her for a long moment, then said, "My name is Lyrelay of the Stellar Court, last warrior of my people, and this is Prism, my companion who has been with me since before your son was young." Grace found her voice and asked, "What happened to your people? And why were you frozen in the ice?" which seemed to be the question everyone wanted answered, even if they were afraid of the response. Lyrelay looked at the humans with ancient sadness in her alien eyes and said, "We fled a war that consumed entire galaxies, and the devourers are beings that exist to unmake reality itself. They consume magic and technology and life itself, leaving only void where worlds once spun." Lyrelay continued, "And my people fought them for 10,000 years before we understood we could not win." Prism added, his mental voice saying, "So we ran carrying the knowledge of the dead and seeking the sanctuary world mentioned in prophecies that said humans would one day stand against the dark." Amy felt the weight of this destiny but pushed it aside, because right now they had practical problems like getting Lyrelay and Prism somewhere warm and figuring out how to repair an alien ship. "First, we get you both to the station," Amy said, taking charge again. "Then you can teach me about your technology while I fix your ship, because apparently the universe decided Earth needs defending." The walk back to the station took time, with Lyrelay weak from her long sleep, but she refused to be carried, and Prism rode on Amy's shoulder like he belonged there already. 3 weeks had passed since the awakening, and Amy found herself working harder than ever before. as she learned to repair technology that blended organic components with crystal circuits and metal that seemed almost alive. The Star Whisper, which was what Lyrelei called the ship, was revealing its secret slowly, and each discovery made Amy realize how far beyond human technology this vessel was, yet somehow she could understand it. Lyrelei proved to be an excellent teacher and engineer in her own right, though her methods were completely different from anything Amy had learned in her years of fixing Earth machines and equipment. Where Amy would use tools and muscle to force connections, Lyrelei would sing to the ship components in her language that sounded like silver bells, and the parts would heal themselves or flow together. "Your technology is crude but fascinating," Lyrelei said while watching Amy create a hybrid patch using both human and alien materials, "because you build without magic, without hearing the song of stars. Yet it works." Amy grinned while welding despite sweat dripping down her face in the cold cave and said, "Humans are stubborn creatures, and we make things work through determination even when they should not." The dragon prism had become comfortable with the human workers and often rode on various shoulders while breathing strange energy into dead systems to wake them up, which still amazed everyone who saw it. He also served as translator when Lyrelei struggled to explain concepts that had no words in English, and his mental voice had become familiar to Amy, like a helpful friend living in her thoughts. The ship was teaching Amy that technology could be grown rather than built, and that consciousness could flow through circuits just as electricity did, which changed everything. She thought she knew about Engineering Station. Life had adapted to their alien guests with surprising speed, and many crew members volunteered to help with repairs, bringing human creativity to problems that had stumped alien civilizations. Kate Phillips watched the work carefully and told Amy that power consumption was becoming a problem because the ship repairs were draining their generators faster than they could refuel in Antarctica. Amy promised to find a solution, but right now getting the ship operational was more important than anything, because Lyrelei grew more worried each day that the Devourers would find them. "You are different from other humans," Lyrelei observed one night as they worked on the navigation array, which needed to align with Earth's magnetic field. For reasons Amy almost understood, the other humans run from Prism or try to cage him for study, but you touched his mind without fear and treat him as an equal, which is why the ship responds to you so well. Amy shrugged and said she fixed things whether they were diesel engines or telepathic dragons, because everything had patterns and systems and you just had to listen to understand how they fit together. Prism landed on her shoulder and told Lyrelei mentally that Amy understood the deep song even without magic, which was why the Star Whisper had chosen her when it called out through the ice. The more Amy worked on the ship, the more she realized it was not just a vessel, but a living archive containing the history and technology of dozens of dead civilizations. Each section she repaired revealed new wonders like star maps, showing the spread of the Devourers across galaxies, and weapons designed to fight beings that existed partially outside normal reality. Grace helped catalog the discoveries, while Beth studied the biological components, trying to understand how organic material could survive centuries of freezing and still function when thawed. The research station had become something more than a scientific outpost as humans and aliens worked together to prepare for a war they barely understood, against an enemy that defied physics. Lisa Chen spent hours with Lyrelei learning about the civilizations that had fallen to the Devourers, and she looked increasingly grim as she understood the scale of destruction they faced. Billions of lives across thousands of worlds had been consumed, leaving only void, where entire star systems once existed and Earth was just another target for the endless hunger. But Amy refused to give in to despair because she had a ship to fix, and that was something concrete she could focus on, instead of cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. She had also made modifications that surprised even Lyrelei, by adding human technology to the alien systems in ways that should not have worked, but somehow created new possibilities. Electromagnetic pulse generators from the station's mining equipment were integrated into the defensive grid, and conventional explosives were modified to work with the ship's targeting systems. "What are you doing?" Lyrelei asked, as Amy wired another impossible connection that made the ship's biological circuits pulse with confused signals, trying to understand the crude human additions. "Being human." Amy replied while adjusting connections that sparked with both electricity and something else entirely. Because we might not have magic, but we have creativity and pure stubborn refusal to lose. The work continued day and night with Amy catching brief naps in the pilot's chair, while her mind processed alien concepts that Prism had shared during their mental connection sessions. Then during the 20th day, the Star Whisper sensors activated on their own and began displaying symbols that flashed urgent warnings across every screen in the cave. Lyrelay went pale, which was impressive given her silver skin, and whispered that the Devourers had found them, and scout units would arrive within 72 hours to test Earth's defenses. Amy looked at the half-repaired ship and the humans who had worked so hard to help, then made a decision that would change everything, as she addressed. The gathered crew, we have 3 days to finish repairs and prepare for war against beings that eat reality itself, she said calmly. But I believe we can do it because humans are too stubborn to die. Kate asked what Amy needed, and without hesitation, she replied, everyone who can hold a tool or wire a connection, because we are going to show the universe that Earth fights back. The next 70 hours blurred together as the entire station threw themselves into the work, with engineers learning alien technology, while Lyrelay sang programming songs to the ship. Amy barely slept as she pushed herself beyond human limits, guided by Prism's presence in her mind, and driven by determination to protect her world from cosmic horror. She created weapons that mixed human crudeness with alien sophistication in ways that made Lyrelay shake her head in amazement, because they should not function, but somehow they did. Grace and Beth organized supply lines while other crew members prepared conventional weapons that might be useless but represented human defiance against the impossible odds they faced. With 12 hours remaining, Lyrelay pulled Amy aside and said there was one more thing needed for the ship to accept human command and allow the hybrid weapons to function at full power. She explained that Amy would need to let Prism fully into her mind to create a bridge between human thought and alien technology, which would hurt but not kill her. Amy looked at the dragon, whose ancient eyes held wisdom from before Earth had life, and asked simply, will it give us a better chance of winning? Yes, Lyrelay replied. And that was all Amy needed to hear, because she would do whatever was necessary to protect her world, even if it meant changing herself forever. She sat in the pilot's chair while Beth prepared medical equipment and Grace stood ready to help, while Prism perched on Amy's head like a small crown of scales and starlight. The process began immediately as alien consciousness flowed into human neurons like liquid fire, and Amy screamed but held on as her mind expanded beyond anything evolution had designed it to handle. The melding process hit Amy like a thunderstorm inside her skull as Prism's ancient consciousness poured into her human mind, bringing thousands of years of memories that no human brain was designed to contain. She saw civilizations rise and fall across time spans that made Earth history seem like an eye blink, and felt the desperation of countless species who had fought the Devourers only to be consumed. Through Prism's memories, she experienced the death of entire star systems as reality itself was eaten away, leaving nothing but hungry void where billions of lives had once flourished in the light. Amy gripped the chair arm so hard her knuckles went white while her body convulsed, but she refused to let go because this pain was nothing compared to what would happen if they failed. Lyrelay stood nearby, singing in her crystal voice to help guide the process, while Grace held medical equipment ready, and Beth monitored vital signs that were spiking into dangerous territory. But more than memories, Amy gained understanding of the Star Whisper itself, and suddenly systems that had confused her for weeks made perfect sense as knowledge flooded through her transformed consciousness. The weapons were not just guns, but instruments that could impose order on chaos, and the shields were not barriers but reality stabilizers that prevented the Devourers from unmaking existence. She understood now why the ship had called to her through the ice, because it needed someone who could bridge the gap between logic and intuition, between crude force and elegant precision. When the process finally ended after what felt like hours but was only minutes, Amy slumped in the chair with blood dripping from her nose, but her eyes blazed with new purpose. The Star Whisper was hers now, responding to her thoughts as naturally as her own body, and she could feel every system, like extensions of her nervous system, reaching throughout the vessel. Grace rushed forward with medical scanners, But Amy waved her off, saying she was fine, just different, and they had work to do because the devourers would arrive in 10 hours. The entire station crew had gathered in the cave, and Amy stood to address them, knowing that her words would determine whether they fled in panic or stood to fight. In 10 hours, beings that exist to destroy reality will attack Earth, she said simply. And we have one ship, and whatever weapons we can create to stop them from consuming our world. Some of you think we should run or hide, but I say we fight because that is what humans do when faced with the impossible, and we have already done the impossible by waking. This ship. Kate stepped forward and said the station was with her and asked what needed to be done in the time remaining to prepare for a war. None of them truly understood. Amy began giving orders with new authority as her enhanced mind calculated possibilities and tactics that blended human unpredictability with alien precision in ways the Devourers would not expect. Teams scattered to implement her plans, while Amy worked on final modifications to the ship, adding more human technology that should not have been compatible, but somehow functioned perfectly. She installed mining detonators, linked to the navigation system, and connected the station's entire power grid to the Star Whisper's weapons array through cables that sparked with otherworldly energy. Lyrelay watched with amazement as Amy created hybrid systems that her people had never imagined possible because they had always thought in terms of either magic or technology. Never both. But humans had no magic, so they forced technology to do impossible things through sheer determination. And Amy was taking that principle to extremes that made reality itself bend. With 5 hours remaining, the proximity sensors screamed warnings as space above Antarctica began to twist and tear as the Devourers forced their way through dimensional barriers. Amy ran to the pilot's position and felt the Star Whisper respond eagerly to her touch, as systems powered up with a sound like singing crystals and roaring engines combined. Through the cave entrance, they could see the Aurora Australis writhing in unnatural patterns as reality protested the intrusion of beings that existed to unmake everything they touched. Grace asked if they could really win against creatures that had destroyed entire civilizations, and Amy grinned with fierce determination that was purely human in its defiance. "We are going to do more than win," Amy said as targeting systems came online showing the approaching swarm, "and we are going to teach them that Earth is not prey, but a trap." The first Devourers descended like holes in the sky where they, past existence, simply ended, leaving void that hurt to look at directly even through the ship's sensors. Amy launched the Star Whisper up through the cave entrance, shattering ice and stone as the restored vessel rose to meet enemies that had chased it across galaxies to finish their meal. The ship moved like liquid starlight under her control, dancing between reality tiers while weapons fired beams of structured existence that gave form to formless hunger, just long enough to destroy station. Crews fired their improvised weapons from the ground, and while bullets and explosives did little, the electromagnetic pulses confused the Devourers' feeding patterns as Amy had predicted. Lyrelay moved through the ship with her singing blade, cutting down any Devourers that managed to breach their shields, while Prism had grown to his full size, breathing creation against destruction. The battle was chaos made manifest as hundreds of Devourers swarmed against one ship, crewed by a human who should not have been able to comprehend the technology she wielded. But Amy had advantages the previous victims lacked because humans thought sideways when pressed, and she used tactics that made no sense to beings that existed on pure hunger. She flew directly at clusters, then shut down all systems going ballistic, which confused Devourers used to prey that ran or fought, but never simply stopped existing energetically. In those moments of confusion, she would restart everything at once, creating feedback, explosions that rippled through their swarm, disrupting their coordination and making them vulnerable. Hours passed in minutes as reality bent and twisted around the battle, while the station defenders threw everything they had at an enemy that defied physics and sanity equally. Beth reported that Devourers had breached the station perimeter heading for the reactor, and Amy split her attention between flying and using station systems to create barriers. She overloaded heating elements to create walls of superheated air and reversed ventilation to make vacuum traps, while never losing focus on the larger battle raging in the sky. The Devourers began to adapt, learning her patterns, but they could not adapt to chaos itself, which is what Amy gave them, mixing human madness with alien precision. More and more of the creatures fled back through their dimensional tiers as the cost of consuming Earth grew higher than the meal was worth in their alien calculations. But Amy knew they would return with greater numbers unless she gave them reason to fear this small blue world that had stood against them when galaxies had fallen. She opened the Star Whisper's memory archives and began transmitting everything the ship had recorded about humanity's violent history and stubborn refusal to accept defeat even when facing extinction. At the end, she added her own message translated into the mathematical language the Devourers used, saying, "Earth is protected, and next time, we will hunt you through your own void." The battle raged across the Antarctic sky as Amy Martinez pushed the Star Whisper beyond limits that should have torn the ship apart, but human stubbornness and alien engineering held together through impossible stresses. Devourers swarmed like hungry. Void made manifest eating pieces of reality wherever they touched. But Amy danced the ship between them with moves that mixed human instinct with alien grace. The weapons sang destruction in harmonies that human ears could not fully hear, while shields flickered between dimensions, keeping the worst of the entropy at bay through will as much as technology station defenders on the ground kept firing their improvised weapons, and while conventional arms did little damage, the electromagnetic pulses Amy had integrated disrupted devourer feeding patterns, making them vulnerable. Lyrelay flowed through the ship corridors like liquid death, her blade singing its own song of ending to any devourer that breached their defenses, while her silver blood healed wounds instantly. Prism had grown to his full size, which filled entire sections of the ship, and his breath was revealed as raw creation itself, the opposite of devourer hunger, making new reality where they left void. But the enemy numbers seemed endless, and Amy felt the ship shuddering under impacts that would have destroyed human vessels instantly. While more devourers poured through dimensional tiers, Beth screamed over comms that the creatures had reached Section C, heading for the fusion reactor. And if they consumed that energy, the explosion would destroy the entire station. Amy split her consciousness in a way that should have been impossible, with part of her still piloting, while another part reached through the station systems. She knew, like her own body. She turned maintenance into warfare by overloading heating systems to create barrier walls of superheated air and reversing ventilation to create vacuum traps that confused the reality eaters. Grace coordinated ground defenses, while engineers who had never fired weapons in their lives stood against cosmic horror with mining tools and determination that was beautifully absurdly human. The Devourers were learning, adapting to Amy's tactics, and beginning to anticipate her moves, which meant she needed to do something they could never predict or understand. Amy aimed the Star Whisper at the largest cluster of Devourers and accelerated to ramming speed, while Lyrelai shouted that this was suicide. But Amy just grinned and said, "Watch this." At the last possible second, she shut down everything, including life support and weapons, turning the ship into a dead hulk of metal and confused biological systems with no energy signature. The Devourers collided with the inert ship and passed through it, finding nothing to consume, which left them disoriented and clustering together. Trying to understand what had happened, in that moment of chaos, Amy brought all systems back online at once, creating an explosion of reactivated technology mixed with electromagnetic pulses and Prism's breath of creation. The feedback loop rippled through the entire swarm as Devourers turned on each other in desperate hunger, consuming their own kind when they could not find other sustenance. Amy screamed and every weapon fired, while on the ground the station defenders threw everything they had, from jury-rigged microwave beams to mining explosives. The Antarctic sky burned with colors that had no names, as reality reasserted itself violently, and Devourers fled back through their tiers rather than face prey that had become predator. But Lyrelai knew they would return with greater numbers, unless Earth gave them reason to fear this small world that had done what entire galactic civilizations could not. Amy already had a plan forming as she accessed the Star Whisper's vast archives, not just the technical data, but the memories of every civilization the Devourers had consumed. She began transmitting it all, but added something new at the end, showing Earth's entire history of warfare and survival, from ancient battles to nuclear exchanges that should have ended them. Every time humanity had faced extinction from plague or war or disaster, they had survived through pure, stubborn refusal to die, and Amy made sure the Devourers understood this. At the very end, she added a message in their mathematical language saying, This world is protected, and if you return, we will follow you home and teach you what humans do to nightmares. She forced all this data into the last fleeing devourer, overloading its pattern-consuming nature with the weight of human defiance and the promise that Earth would not just defend, but pursue. The creature fled, carrying a warning that would spread through whatever collective consciousness the devourers shared, letting them know Earth was off limits unless they wanted war. As the dimensional tiers closed and the aurora returned to its natural dance, the Star Whisper settled back onto the Antarctic ice. With systems slowly powering down, Amy collapsed in the pilot's chair as her connection to Prism gently separated, leaving her exhausted but human again, while the dragon shrank to his small size and curled in her lap. Through the comms she could hear cheering from the station as defenders realized they had survived and won against impossible odds through human stubbornness and alien technology. Grace asked if it was truly over, and Lirelai answered that the Devourers knew fear now something they had never felt before, and would think long before returning to Earth. Kate wanted to know what would happen if they came back anyway, and Amy looked at the hybrid controls she had created, showing that impossible things became possible when you refuse to accept limits. Then we will be ready, she said, because we have the ship and the knowledge, but most importantly, we have the will to protect our world from anything the universe throws at us. In the days that followed, the world learned about first contact and the battle for Earth, while governments argued about what to do with alien technology and visitors. But Amy had already decided that Lirelai and Prism would stay as teachers and protectors while she continued working on the Star Whisper, learning more each day about the impossible. The ship became the foundation for Earth's new age as humans learned to blend their technology with alien knowledge, creating possibilities that neither species had imagined alone. Lirelai marveled at how quickly humans adapted to concepts that had taken her people millennia to develop, while Amy just shrugged and said they were good at breaking rules. Years later, Amy would stand in the workshop she had built in the Antarctic, where human and alien tools worked side by side, creating wonders that defied old limitations. She would remember the day she touched a frozen ship and changed history by refusing to accept that anything was too broken to fix even reality itself. Other ships were built following the Star Whisper's template, but modified with human ideas that made Lirelai laugh and shake her head at the beautiful absurdity of the designs. Prism became ambassador between species, teaching human children that dragons were real, while learning that humans made the best friends because they were crazy enough to try anything. The Devourers never returned, though. Sometimes sensors detected them at the edge of known space, watching and remembering that Earth had teeth and was not afraid to bite. Amy continued her work fixing impossible things and teaching others that the secret was not accepting impossible as an answer, but as a challenge to overcome. The Antarctic ice still held secrets, but none as profound as the day. A human mechanic found an alien ship and decided to fix it, starting a new chapter in Earth's story. And in the depths of space, the warning spread that Earth was protected by beings who turned weaknesses into weapons and fought entropy itself with nothing but determination. The war was not over, but Earth stood ready with human mechanics who could repair anything, even broken realities, while the universe learned respect for the small blue world.